Hey everybody, I'm Aminata, Desert Rose Plant Walker Firewoman, and I'm here today with our guest, tree spirituality specialist, Beth Norcross. Welcome, Beth.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I've been really looking forward to this.
Same here. Since I took your course on the spirituality of trees, I've been like waiting to like get closer to you. So I'm really excited that you said yes. And I like to begin every interview with what's good. So for you today, in this moment, in your body, what feels good?
Well, so much good, so much good. But uppermost in my heart, the first thing that comes to mind is just being here with my daughter. As you know, I usually live somewhere else, but I think you have a daughter too. And you know, if you live apart, there's a little piece of your heart that always lives separate from you. And right now, my heart's all together, and that feels really good.
Yes,
Oh,
I do know the feeling of the daughter
oh,
far away. So
yeah.
I'm glad you all got to get together. Um, so Beth, one of the things that I just want to I'm gonna let everybody know ahead of time. We're gonna geek out on trees on this episode
We are.
because you're like my first guest who's like super, super, super focused on trees and has, academically trained in forestry. So how fun. I guess my first question I want to ask you, I know you have a background in mathematics. How did you get from something like mathematics to the spirituality of trees? Okay, I know that's a hard question, but maybe you can just tell us a little bit of the story. Like what made you leave math behind or
Well, I was looking in college, looking for something to apply the math to, something interesting. And I had always loved spending time in the natural world. And so I found this link between mathematics and forestry. I did a lot of computer modeling of tree growth and things like that. And then worked in the forestry and environmental field for many years. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but I have such respect for the environmentalists, and goodness knows their work, especially today, is so consuming. For me, it felt that we were trying to convince people to do the right thing with head talk. And it felt to me like we were missing something. And so I went to seminary, theological school, and spent some time exploring uh, environmentalism and forestry in particular from the standpoint of the Christian faith. But it still felt that we were too engaged in actions, and that my strong sense in spending so much time with the trees, that the first step that we have to do is be with the trees, relate to them, see them. And then out of that love, out of that relationship, we can come to act in their behalf and in our mutual behalf. So that's
yeah.
a very quick rundown is how I got from math to the spirituality of trees and
Wow.
started this Center for Spirituality and Nature.
Well, I love that. And you're the founder of the Center for Spirituality and
Yes.
Nature.
Now we've
Okay.
been around for almost 10 years now.
Oh, great, great. Well, I founded a nonprofit myself, so I know what a heavy lift that
Mm,
is.
it
And
is.
especially a small nonprofit. It's
Yes, yes,
amazing. It's a labor of love.
it is indeed.
Mm. So I want to ask you about okay, so let's talk about forestry for a moment. So
Sure.
I was reading Peter, is it Wohlenben?
Yeah,
The
Voleben.
yes, the German.
The hidden lives of trees.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So a bunch of my friends and I read his books, and we read The Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard, and she also was a forester. So you're like, to me it seems like you're like this trend of people in forestry who are like don't want to do what you were supposed to do in the way that you were trained to do it, but you kind of took a left somewhere. Tell me about that. Do you think that's broader than you, or do you want to tell me a little bit about, was there like a spiritual thing that happened inside of you that made you kind of take the left?
It's one of the things that I love about your podcast is you just go in. Let's just go in together. For me, it felt less like a left turn, but rather than as a rooted, to use a tree. I just kept going deeper and deeper. And Suzanne Simard starts that from a science perspective, doesn't she? She goes underneath the ground and finds all of these incredible connections underneath the ground, beyond our sight. What's going
Yes.
on down there, right? And so Peter Voleben and Suzanne, they're digging around in the dirt. And I think it's evolution. It's like any plant or animal that evolves. For me, it was an evolution to, we started up here with the trees, we went underneath the ground to see more of these connections. And for me, it's that deepest step that we can take into this work of the soul. Where does my soul meet that of you, other humans, other beings, other trees? So for me, it was a deepening. And I think that just came, I hadn't really thought about it, but it just came with time with the trees. There's just more and more that you see them, you want to know more, you want to dig more deeply, both physically and also spiritually. What's going on with them? How does that connect? How does my soul connect with their soul? So I think it's just time outside with the trees and with other fellow travelers, fellow human travelers who wanted to go on this journey with me, and from whom I've learned so very much.
Mm. So why don't you tell me about a couple of people fellow travelers who you've really been influenced by, who've helped you to go deeper and evolve?
Well, this might seem self-serving, but the first person that comes to mind is my co-author of The Spiritual Wisdom of Trees, this new book that we're writing, Leah Rampey. She used to be head of the Shalem Institute for Spiritual Formation in the DC area. And I have had the pleasure and privilege of teaching with her, now writing with her. You remember her from the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees class. There is so much about how she opens to spirit, to other, that I've learned, a great deal from. And then scientists, I think I credit Suzanne Simard for getting me, into the dirt and underneath, and encouraging me and others to look and imagine that there are worlds beyond my sight, and that life is much more than just what I can see and experience, that there's so much more going on. So those are just two people that come to mind right off the top of my head. And then the many, many people who write in this spirit and nature space as well.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I remember when my son first introduced me to Suzanne Simard. I hadn't read her book. I read her book very late, actually.
Mhm.
Um, but I had a sense about mother trees. It's so odd how that was just kind of like in the air, you know? That was just it was circulating, and then I saw a film with her. So
Yeah.
so it's like sometimes, have you ever heard this thing, like sometimes when things percolate and they build, and then all of a sudden they burst through, and all of a sudden they're like, there's a wide consciousness about it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you can. My bookshelf is just growing and growing by leaps and bounds. There's so many books on trees now. Of course, the Overstory was very popular, and there's some oldies but goodies in there too. I think there have been people early on who were trying to get us there, who don't necessarily have the notoriety. There's a book by Tom Wessels, Reading the Forest Landscape. And he just takes us outside, and he says every tree, every forest has a story. And he gives us clues to unearthing, quite literally unearthing that story when we're out in the forest, what to look for, the way moss grows on a particular tree, the way trees grow together. People like that, they've been at it for a long time. And so I like to give them their due too.
Absolutely.
Those
Thank
are the
you.
pioneers who are, started us. And now, as you said, it's just mushroomed. But I also think that people are yearning now. They are so hungry for guidance, for reassurance. So many people are leaving traditional religious institutions. And I understand that, but then people ask me, where do I go? Where do I go? Once they've left that, they want something more direct. And we need to provide, and we hope both through the center, through our spirituality and nature groups, are providing some of those opportunities as well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yearning, I think people are looking, don't you think, for
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
hope, reassurance, resilience.
Yes, I'm one of them. I
Yeah,
think we're yearning for relationship again, for
absolutely.
returning back to relationship. I wanted to call out a name that we don't often think about when we think about early ecological writing or eco art. I want to call out Alice Walker.
Yeah, the color
No?
purple.
Yeah.
If you walk by the color purple and you don't notice it, it pisses God off. I believe was her phrase. No, I think she got it. I think
Well,
she gets it early on, y'all.
oh, so early on. And I remember one of her poems was something like, when they do X to you, hug a tree. When they do X, it was like a litany of like oppressive, systematic violence kind of things that coming out of the overculture that we live in. And her refrain was hug a tree. And I remember thinking, and I remember talking with, this is back in the 90s, talking with other young Black activists. And we were kind of like, hug a tree? What is wrong with her? Literally, what is wrong with her? And now, as you said, the evolution, the opening to wider wisdom and wider relationship. Wow. So we are very grateful to those who paved that way early on.
I'd like to also bring forth Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman, that, extraordinarily prolific. How many descriptors, right? Mystic, church leader, civil rights leader. And, we know that his book was, we think, in the pocket of Martin Luther King's pants or jacket the entire time that he was doing his ministry. But Howard Thurman grew up on the coast of, as you probably know, in the coast of Northeast Florida. And he put up with some stuff. He had some stuff. And he would go to the ocean or he would go to the forest. And he has these beautiful quotes. There's another way that we dig around in him a little bit. And there's so much to him. And he loved the natural world and he found healing and solace there. And, this was 30s, 40s, 50s. So I just want to name him as well as one of those patriarchs of earth-based theology that we don't usually think about.
And what was the name of Howard Thurman's book? Because you mentioned that you felt like Dr. King might have had his book with him. In case people out here want to know.
Jesus and the Disinherited, I think, was the name. He talks about people of color with their backs against the wall. And Jesus was always in favor of those with their backs against the wall. It's a very slim book. But a lot of his mystical works have a lot of references to the natural world and to trees as well.
Well, I don't know if this is true, but I was listening to a psychedelic themed podcast, and someone brought up Howard Thurman, saying that he had participated in some kind of experiment, all by choice, with some seminarians, some of his students. Really. So
I don't know, but I wouldn't doubt it. He was very progressive and really was pushing, in so many ways, pushing the envelope.
I love that. So I remember that there's that Howard Thurman quote, right, where he says, don't ask what the world needs, ask what sets you on fire, and then go do that. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for presencing Howard Thurman on this podcast.
Yeah. I took a class at Wesley Seminary by the wonderful Dr. Beverly Mitchell, and it was a whole week of an intensive week of Howard Thurman. And I started reading, and I thought, oh my goodness, there's so much nature here. Let's take it out and lift it up.
Let's reclaim it. And
Mhm.
so tell me about, you've alluded to this, uh, and I kind of sniffed it out that you had made a journey from maybe traditional Christianity to something more expansive. In your bio, I think you talk about the deep mystery. So tell me a little bit about that journey.
Well, I really appreciate that. I should start by saying I have the utmost respect for all major religions, and in particular Christianity, the one that most informed me. Um, which, in seminary, they don't tell you this when you go to seminary, that they often your faith structure is completely broken apart. I just felt like it was like a 1,000-piece puzzle that you just sort of threw on the ground. And that for me, I started putting the pieces back together again. A number of the pieces fell on the ground and didn't feel necessary for me to pick up again, if I might use that metaphor. And by that I meant, for me anyway, Christianity felt limiting. I know it isn't for many, but it was for me. There was something broader, and I was, of course, I was out in the woods and exploring my own nature-based spirituality. So I came to realize that, again, for me, that there appears to be some kind of a wisdom, call it divine wisdom, call it God, call it what you like, a truth that underlies all religious traditions. That these religious traditions are on the surface. They're human constructions of trying to understand that living force, that enlivening source that's out there, and they're trying to put words and rituals and stuff to it. And for me, it began to be just a source of confusion. What do I believe, and what liturgy can I say, and what ritual? So let's just go underneath. Let's go to the source. And so for me, the earth provides that sense, that strong visceral sense of something other and beyond me, and at the same time within me and within all the critters and creatures whom I encounter, human and non, in the natural world. And so that's where I sit now with that truth. And that's just more and more apparent to me that this is at this stage of life where I belong, where my soul resides, where it rests.
Hmm. Do
Does
you
that make
ever?
sense?
Oh yeah, of course, that makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense. And I'm wondering, as someone who decided to go underneath, go deeper down, um, I wonder if you ever miss the structures or rituals, or have you replaced those with other structures and other rituals?
I love that question. And I'm actually getting a little lump in my throat. I miss I miss the rituals. More than that, I miss that this is where I was formed. This was my home.
Yeah.
I miss home.
Mm.
You were talking with Terry Schmidt, I think, about losses in your podcast. Very interesting podcast with her. And there's loss in there. There's a sense that I can't go home again. And that, as much as the rituals I miss, I also miss that sense of community because it's ready made. And the progressive church with which I was involved were doing all sorts of wonderful good works, including earth care and earth engagement. I miss my own species. I miss my fellow travelers in those spaces. And so I'm digging around trying to find these, as I said, these spirituality and nature groups that we were starting. I want to give a shout out to the Church of the Wild Network, who's doing extraordinary work in this way as well. But I think I miss the communities that are already formed and ready to go, and nothing I have to start.
Right.
And I
Right.
miss that. I miss that home. I miss that. I was it Thomas Wolfe who said, "You can't go home again." That's how I feel. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's loss and grief in there, and at the same time, I know that I can't, and it's okay. I'm come into acceptance of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. right? I could say
Yeah.
ditto. I could personally,
Yeah.
I could say ditto.
I run into a number of people in the 10 years that we've been doing this work who are I meet so many people, and you saw them in the trees class as well, who are just yearning for a different kind of community. A place where they can be entirely themselves, where they are stepping away from somebody, a priest or a minister trying to tell them how to be, or liturgies and litanies and doctrine and all those things that feel like barriers to a more intimate experience of what we might call divine unity or divine mystery. And so I meet these fellow travelers. I'm guessing there are people watching this who are feeling similarly right now. It's a time of great transition in so many ways, obviously politically, culturally, environmentally, but also spiritually.
Yeah. Um, and I feel like, the opportunity is to be with it all. Every path, every spiritual path has that opportunity, and it has that potential in it. And when you've outgrown, or you've shifted, or you evolved out of the one that you grew up with, um, you you can still do it. You can still, I don't know what to say. I guess I'm thinking about my own most recent experience of oneness. I was on a volcano on the lava flows in the Big Island of Hawaii, and I was just sitting on the lava flows, looking at the ocean, and um, and all of a sudden, I just decided to relax into it all. To me, as just one part of it all, but definitely part of it all. And it's such a beautiful experience. And it's like when you when the path is to carve it each time, rather than to rely on the religious community you were a part of to carve it for you. But when you have to carve it, notice it, pause. It's like a whole nother level of, I don't know, co-creation, adulthood.
But it's hard, isn't it, to do that, co-creation. Those lava fields. I'm right there with you. I had also. I think it's hard not to have a seminal experience if you really sit, because you're watching the earth being formed in front of you. And that should all give us all hope, shouldn't it? I mean, in the midst of all this chaos and craziness with which we live, there's the earth being formed right in front of us.
Yeah.
And then you look out on those lava fields. And I have to say this because you brought it up. You look out on that, it's solid, almost slate,
Yes.
black. And you think, goodness gracious, nothing could. And that might be a metaphor for where we are now politically. We have such despair. And yet you look over that lava field, and there's a photo that I use in a lot of my talks, and there's that tiny little plant.
A lot of plants
Growing out of that spare, hostile environment that you would think nothing could grow in. Something got lodged there.
Yeah.
What's our part in that? Is it to observe it? Is it to be grateful? Is it to water it? What's our role in that? But it's happening. It's happening beyond our sight, beyond our abilities, beyond. There's just tiny little plants in all sorts of metaphorical lava fields. And that just gives me such reassurance. So I've moved off. That's the same
Thank
thing
you.
happens with trees. I mean, they just emerge, my goodness, without doing anything.
Yes, and I think it's called the little sound issue. I think it's called the ahina tree. Actually, creates its own soil.
Mhm.
I will check that and put that in the show notes, make sure I give you the right name. But that's an amazing evolution. I want to ask you something before we started the call. Um, you were talking to us about uh, trees as guides, as way showers. And you talked about self pruning, for example. So tell us about self pruning. What kind of trees self prune, and when do they do it?
Well, we were chatting before the call about self-pruning, and most trees, that certainly the ones that I'm aware of in the eastern deciduous forest, self-prune. There are so many ways that trees can guide us, and this is one. As we were talking about, trees don't need their lower branches, and they just let them go. And the reason they let them go is that if you can picture a tree growing in a forest, it has a lot of people around it, and a lot of trees around it, and other things that might impair its ability to get to the sun. So that what this tree needs, as what we need, is light and energy. And so to get that, what they need their leaves to pull in that sun and that chlorophyll that comes from the leaves to photosynthesize, to get their energy. So those lower branches, they don't get much sun, and they don't produce many leaves. So the tree just lets them go. It accepts that there's loss. And you can see in a tree, if you go walking in the forest, little knobs where these trees have self-pruned. There are so many other ways. I'll just very quickly, trees are so resilient. And Howard Thurman actually talked about the Southern Pines and how his community, his Black community of the 50s and 40s and 60s, had to bend and bend and bend and bend. And then he says, sometimes though, you have to be courageous and be willing to break. Mm. And so trees can show resilience. If you walk in the woods in the forest, you'll see the trees, how they grow this way and then they grow that way. And every tree has a story. They've had to overcome obstacles, and so are we. So sometimes in our lives, we have to grow straight. All we can do is just grow horizontally. Then there are times when the light shines more brightly and we can go toward the sun again. Oh, something comes in our way, we have to twist around. So resilience, trees show us resilience and adaptation and acceptance, and also renewal. Entire forests being created by what they call natural regeneration, all by themselves, with no help from us. Not to say that we should sit on our hands, but the trees are always replanting themselves with the help of all the critters and creatures in the forest. So resilience, adaptation, bending, turning, renewing, and counting on those around us, our community collaboration. So those are just a few things that trees can really inspire us to do during these very difficult, challenging times. Because they've had their own challenges over the course of their 350 million years they've been around.
Right. So they preceded us on the planet. And I noticed that you refer to trees as our elders.
Yes, aren't they wise old elders? They've been around. We came around in our current form maybe 200,000 years ago, probably closer to 100,000 years. Those trees in a variety of forms have been around for a long, long time. And they helped to establish soil. When the first watery creatures started coming out from the ocean and from the various waters, they found something like soil because the early trees and the early plants had decayed. That's another thing trees can teach us, that decay and death are necessary. I'm sure you've seen these nurse logs in the forest, these old dead trees. There's no finality of death in the forest, because these trees nurture these dead trees. They nurture all sorts of bugs and mites and worms, and new saplings come out of them. so much we can learn from trees. I feel like I'm just listening.
Yes, yes, I love it. I love it. Tell me this. Uh, do you ever talk to trees or hear trees talk to you or somehow have a direct experience of a tree communicating with you?
Well, as you said, I came out of a math background. I'm a pretty pragmatic person, and I resisted for a long, long time. But like so many things, so many people there, there's that expression, there are no atheists in foxholes. uh, Foxholes. Well, when I am desperate, I'll come to the trees. And I was writing the last chapter of this book, that the spiritual wisdom of the trees, that I'm writing with Leah, and I got stuck. And so I went out to a forest, and I said, what do you want me to tell them? What do you want me to tell them? And who knows whether it came from me or the trees? I mean, I don't know. But the strong message that I got was to tell them about renewal. Tell them about renewal. And I looked around to this. We steward a property out in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and this incredible pine forest that came up all by itself, without any help from us. That just emerged from this spare land. And I'm looking at it. Tell them about renewal, Beth. Tell them that there's hope in that, and that there's stuff going on in the ground that nature has in mind that you might not be aware of yet. There's magic under the ground. There are plantations, there are forests and groves just ready to sprout out. Tell them about the forest. Tell them about the groves. Tell them the magic that's growing underground and is ready to renew this world. Tell them about that, Beth.
Mm.
And so I try to listen. It's hard for me because it's not my thing. But I got that message really strong. Whether it was from God through the trees, whether it was the trees directly, whether it was divine unity, who cares, right? That was
Yes.
the message that I was receiving.
Wow, we're going to take a break and hear a message from our sponsor right now. But when we come back, we're going to find out how we can get more of Beth, resources that she has for us so that we don't have to make up how we get out there and connect with the natural world and
Yeah.
spirituality of trees. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Yeah.